you have the...
Thank you, Jennifer. So I was tasked to give you an overview of the water quality impacts in 2018 and 19 in the next 4 minutes. So I'll do my best. Of course, you know who the panelists are. So 2018 and 2019 obviously really demonstrated the impact that water quality can have on our communities. The cyanobacteria blooms, the dominant species was Microcystis aeruginosa, which is predominantly a freshwater cyanobacteria. Really, the blooms began to develop in the Caloosahatchee sometime around late May, early June, and had a tremendous impact on the communities along the Caloosahatchee, predominantly in the freshwater portions of the river. But the bloom that began in June really continued throughout the summer and into the fall. And Roland's going to talk a little bit about the economic impacts, but it really impacted every stretch of the Caloosahatchee River and estuary, about 70 miles of the river and estuary. Doesn't mean it was continuous throughout the entire river and estuary, but we did a flyover, and we could see it in the main stem of the river, most of the canals along the Caloosahatchee, predominantly in Cape Coral and North Fort Myers. And so it had a big impact on our community. It really underscored the issues that we have with the water quality, both in Lake Okeechobee, but also what comes from our watershed. The Caloosahatchee watershed, on average, provides about 50% of the flows that come through the Franklin Lock and Dam at S79. So we have to deal with the water quality in our own watershed.
Yeah, you can.
If you're on the phone, please mute. So at the same time that we were experiencing the cyano blooms, shortly after, we began to see some pretty intense red tide blooms start to impact the coast of Southwest Florida, in particular Sanibel, Captiva, Bonita Beach, Fort Myers Beach. And those blooms for us on Sanibel really began to impact our community in July, when we had a 26-foot whale shark wash up on our beaches, about 10,000-pound whale shark. That was really the indicator that we were in for a rough ride. And in total, we cleaned up about 850,000 pounds of dead marine life from our beaches. Cost about $1.6 million, and that's just on Sanibel alone. Roland's going to talk a little bit about some of the impacts that they had in Lee County. But that's a tremendous impact for a small community like Sanibel. And the Sanibel Captiva Chamber of Commerce reported lost revenue in the range of about $47 million just for Sanibel and Captiva alone. And during that same time, we had cancellation rates for our hotels and accommodations on Sanibel of 78%. You can't sustain those kind of impacts for a small community like Sanibel and Captiva. But of course, we know that the red tide isn't directly related to the water runoff. It may be indirectly related, but the red tide starts offshore, it moves onshore. It's been said that Karenia brevis isn't a picky eater, and then when it comes into contact with excess nutrients, that it can add, it can be fueled by those excess nutrients. But what we do know is that the nutrients that are running off the Caloosahatchee watershed or coming from Lake Okeechobee aren't helping the situation. And many of the water bodies throughout Florida are actually impaired for both nitrogen or phosphorus. And we have other indicators of the problems that we have with nutrients. These are some examples of other algae blooms that aren't red tide or the cyanobacteria that we saw in the freshwater portions of the river. The photos on your left are photos of the red drift algae that washed up on Sanibel this past year between January and March. We also saw large amounts of the same red drift algae washing up on Fort Myers Beach. And in May, we started to experience a filamentous cyanobacteria, which is a marine species. It was formerly referred to as Lyngbia, but it's a species called Dapis. And that's another indicator of eutrophication. So we know we have a problem with nutrients in the system. We just have to come up with some projects to resolve them. And I think the goal of this working group is to work on a feasibility study where we can start to move forward evaluating things that we can do to improve water quality, either entering within or leaving the C-43 reservoir. So I'm going to turn it over to Roland to talk about some of the economic impacts that we experienced this year.
Well, thanks, James. Imagine having two events at the same time, what that impact may be to our economy, particularly tourism. Just think of what that could be there. More specifically, imagine you're that person that's looking on the website, looking for a vacation spot that summer, and seeing the images, what you saw on there, regardless if it was local or not, it was out there. With the advent of social media the way it is, that message got across basically worldwide. Or worse yet, imagine you're that person that's already booked the vacation and you're getting ready to go down to Sanibel and spend your hard-earned money that you saved up for that vacation, either once in a lifetime or for that summer. So it's devastating. And so I thought I'd briefly talk about what really is at risk when we talk about tourism and what the impacts of the state of Florida as well as locally. As you are well aware, probably tourism is our number one economic driver. It generates $11.6 billion in state and local revenues each year. 50% of that is just basically the sales tax. Employs more than 1.4 million Floridians. That's 1 in 6 of us are employed indirectly or directly related to tourism. Generates more than $111.7 billion in direct economic impact. That's out-of-state visitors, what they're spending in our area yearly. So as you realize, Florida, we're very associated, very tied to water resources. People come here to the sun, sand, and surf, enjoy our rivers, our springs. So any kind of liability specifically. Please mute your website.
Work on this over the break. Please mute your phone.
And we also know that these economic impacts are far-reaching. If you recall the Deepwater Horizon, the BP oil spill, that happened up, far away from us. But we felt impacts here. People believe that we were actually having tar balls on our beaches. So this can happen throughout the state regardless. If we could have algae bloom in the northeast part of the county or the state, and it'll still be presented as all Florida. So it has a far-reaching impact. So. The specific impacts on Lee County's economy. Now, addressing the blue-green algae, we removed 400,000 gallons of slurry. We realized that was just basically touching the problem. We were trying to help specific properties that had a real nuisance issue. We understood we weren't cleaning our water bodies up. We were basically removing foul-smelling, thick gunk in front of people's homes where they couldn't basically reside anymore. They're basically moving out because it was so bad. The smell was horrific. And that cost $1.6 million. Fortunately, we had a lot of state funding. Most of that was state funded, so that was very fortunate. We moved 2,000 tons of material associated with the red tide from our beaches, our shorelines, and that cost $2.5 million. Again, most of that was funded by DEP. We were very fortunate to have that funds available to us last summer. But we have to gear up for next year. What's it going to cost if we have this issue this year or next year? So we have to, gear up for that. We'll have to put some funds aside so that we can address it in the future. The man hours, even though we got the grant funding, we spent 36,000 hours of labor hours towards that cleanup effort. So it is very impacting for a local economy like ours, and specifically like small cities and towns. It's even worse. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Carpenter. She's going to go over some of the state initiatives.
Thanks, Roland. All right. So clearly, Southwest Florida has been experiencing some very significant and tangible consequences of water quality problems. It's also clear that our economy is absolutely dependent upon healthy water resources. And with that understanding and a sense of urgency, like I mentioned, around the problem, Governor DeSantis, within 48 hours of being sworn in, issued Executive Order 1912, achieving more for Florida's environment achieving more now for Florida's environment. So the order laid out directives for state agencies like DEP, Department of Health, the Water Management District, to take action to enhance Florida's water resources and protect natural resources. So this included the creation of a chief science officer position for the first time in the state's history. And that chief science officer is actually Dr. Tom Frazier from the University of Florida. He also heads up the newly created Office of Environmental Accountability and Transparency. And so this position and the office really are designed to help form the decisions that we make as a state with science. So some of the other significant actions the executive order directs the state agencies to undertake include securing $2.5 billion for Everglades restoration over the next 4 years. And to that end, in this year's legislative session, the governor's request was for $300 million, and the legislature did fund that and then some. It establishes a blue-green algae task force, which is designed to expedite progress towards reducing the impacts of these blue-green algae blooms. It requires updating of BMAPs, which are Basin Management Action Plans. They're essentially water quality restoration blueprints for specific water bodies. And so those in South Florida that include Lake Okeechobee, St. Lucie, and Caloosahatchee, those BMAPs will be updated by January 2020. And it also expedited key Everglades projects like the C-43 and C-44 reservoirs. And then the order specifically calls for DEP to work with the South Florida Water Management District to add stormwater treatment to the C-43 reservoir to provide additional treatment and improve the quality of water leaving this important storage component. So you'll hear that a few times today. That's specific language in the order. And so the mechanism for developing that water quality treatment component is the C-43 Reservoir Feasibility Study, Water Quality Feasibility Study. And in developing the framework for that study, DEP and the Water Management District really recognize the importance of local stakeholder input and participation. And so a working group was formed. And that working group is inclusive of local governments, including Sanibel and Lee County. And so the goal of the working group really is to ensure that the best available information in science is integrated into the study and informs the decisions made by the working group. And the idea is to select a project that really produces the greatest benefits for the resources that are available, but also, gets that study completed within about 18 months so that we have a conceptual project at the end of it that we can then move forward with. And the order is clear. It doesn't say, we do a study. It says we implement a project. And so that is the intent. So I also wanted to note that in addition to this forum, there are going to be other opportunities for public input into the feasibility study. You'll hear a little bit more about that in a minute. And so the feasibility study and the resulting water quality project is intended to complement a multi-tiered approach to addressing the Caloosahatchee estuary. The map here is just intended to remind us all of the size of the Caloosahatchee estuary watershed. Runs all the way from Sanibel to Moorhaven, of course, then also influenced by Lake Okeechobee and its watershed. So it is very big. And the C-43 reservoir and the water quality component can't solve all the problems of the estuary, but it's, as Jennifer said, a really important piece of the puzzle. So there are a number of other efforts and projects throughout South Florida, some of which you'll hear about today, like the Lake Okeechobee project. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's part of the Northern Everglades and Estuaries Protection Plan. Local BMAP projects are also very important. Roland, I think, is going to be speaking about some of those locally here. And also want to mention the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project, which when implemented will benefit the lake as well as the estuary. And I mention it because the legislature this year did provide $50 million to help expedite parts of that. So with that context, I want to bring us back to the topic of the day, which is really looking at the information and the science available to us right now about the Caloosahatchee system to help inform the C-43 Reservoir Water Quality Feasibility Study. And Kim Sikorsky is next. She's going to talk a little bit about the reservoir itself, as well as the objectives of the feasibility study.
Good morning. I think it's already been mentioned that the C-43, the first contemplation, was in the Comprehensive Everglades and Restoration Plan in 2000. It was, Congress authorized the C-43 in 2014. Oops, sorry about that. Right here?
No, you, Queen.
No, I want to advance the slide. Oh, okay.
You're right.
All right, sorry about that. But the Congress authorized the C-43 in 2014, making it eligible for funding. It's not the same as funding it. The Water Management District began construction in 2015 on the reservoir, and as I believe was said earlier, we anticipate 2023 as the completion of construction. Janet Stearns, the project manager for probably close to 2 decades on this project, will be speaking later this afternoon in much more detail on the reservoir. The reservoir, it's 10,500 acres, 170,000 acre feet, and it will capture our basin runoff as well as Lake Okeechobee releases in the wet season, to the excess flows during the wet season to better balance the salinity levels within the Caloosahatchee estuary. And as well, in the dry season, when the estuary needs more water, it'll pulse that stored water to the estuary again to generate better balance with the salinity levels. The feasibility study, the primary objective is to look for opportunities for additional nutrient load reductions. I think James had said we're looking at pre-treatment and reservoir treatment and post-treatment or combo thereof, because often a treatment train is more cost-effective and you get greater benefits. The goal of the study is to come up with a minimum of 3 conceptual alternatives. They've got to be cost-effective and technically feasible, conventional or innovative technology. We're looking at biological, chemical, and physical water quality technologies. And it's got to be scalable for 10,500 acres and available for the long term. And very importantly, we must maintain the current search schedule and the congressionally approved project purpose and operations of the C-43. So with that, I will turn it over to George Events of J-Tech, our consultant for the feasibility study.
Thanks. Good morning. I'm George Events with J-Tech. We're the consultant for the Water Management District on this project, and we are an integrated team of scientists and engineers that have been working with the district on a lot of, like I said, water quality and restoration projects. Our team includes subject matter experts on water quality, wetland treatment systems, nutrient reduction technologies, and water resource engineering. We have project-specific experience in the area with the C-43 reservoir design and construction management, as well as the C-43 mesocosm study, which targets nitrogen removal. Both of those projects will be expanded upon in future presentations today. In our statement of work, we have a kickoff meeting and quarterly progress meetings with the working group. We look forward to working with the local experts on this topic and getting their feedback to support the study. One of the first tasks will be a literature review, looking at all previous studies, including watershed assessments, basin-specific feasibility studies, the DEP Water Quality Treatment Technologies Database, and then, as we've mentioned a few times, the C-43 reservoir design and water quality testing reports that have been done historically. We will have significant public input on both the literature review and the feasibility study. The treatment technologies that we plan to review are, as stated previously, pre and post reservoir processes, and then potentially some in-reservoir treatment technologies. That could be physical filtration, a wetland treatment system, aeration, chemical treatment, and other biological treatments, as well as a combination of treatments. So we're going to be kind of looking at a matrix of all types of treatment technologies, and just diagrams of examples of these types of technologies, looking at physical filtration of the algae or a coagulation treatment for nutrients. We do have a few constraints with the study. We will be completing the study in 18 months. At the end of 18 months, our alternatives will be conceptual in nature, and the Water Management District will need to pursue future design work and modeling to further the project. And as mentioned several times today, we must maintain the current construction schedule and not affect the operations of the reservoir. And just an example of some of our next steps, we plan on kicking off the study here in the next few weeks, and we will have public meetings throughout the next 18 months, including an initial public meeting in the fall for public input and throughout the study time period. So that's all I had to present today. All the public meetings will be noticed on the websites of the working group team, and we look forward to your input.
Great, thank you very much to our panelists. Now we're going to go into our interactive session. For those of you online and in the room, if you wouldn't mind taking out your smartphones now. And typing in Menti, MENTI.com. And the code, once you're at Menti, that down if you want to go, is 143919. So you can go ahead and log in, and we'll just begin in just a moment. Okay, so when you get to Menti, just hold on 1 second. It's again 143919. We're just going to right now fix a glitch in the system. Are we going to do the mute all? Okay, well, let's go back then. All right. Okay, so we have a couple icebreaker questions for you just to get you comfortable with this technology. First, if you just want to indicate how much you strongly disagree or agree with these questions or statements. As you can see, the way Menti works is it's taking all of the data that it's collecting from both the in-person attendees and the virtual attendees, combining it to give us cumulative results instantaneously. And that's what it's going to be doing throughout the day, so that we can get your feedback and allow full participation by a broad audience that is with us in person and online. All right. All right, so we're going to wrap up with this question and go to one more. Just enter a word or phrase that best describes our water resources to you. And again, this is just an icebreaker to warm you up.
Look how cool that is. Yeah.
Great. You can see we got 64 responses in that time frame, and it's still climbing. Really wonderful tool to get all your input very rapidly, and then we can actually, all this is being recorded and can be provided to the consultants for their use. So with that, we're going to go to the next Minty session, which is basically an open-ended question format where you're going to be able to enter in your question for these presenters that just presented. Go ahead and type that in now. If you're online, you can do this as well. Just type it into Minty, and they'll start to come up on our screen for our presenters to look at. And then they will choose the ones that they are able to respond to, and we'll answer as many as we can within the time frame we have. So the first question I'll go ahead and answer. It says, will all the slides be available after the presentation? And yes, we can make those available on the chinep.org website.
So I handle number 2 as well.
Again, there is a question about why is there only 20 minutes for public engagement? Just be aware that actually there's public engagement worked into every session throughout the entire day. So there's going to be literally hours of public engagement throughout the day. So you will have a chance to interact, ask questions, and make comments, and other Minty sessions that are woven into every session. All right, so if our presenters wouldn't mind starting to take down any that they see that they feel comfortable and able to respond to, in a few minutes, we will begin the Q&A.
You're just doing the mouse. I feel like that's weird. Can I do it like this? Yeah, works.
I'm just scrolling down, giving a little time on each scroll down. So there's some new questions here at the bottom. Give you a chance to review those. Flashing. That's weird. New ones come in. I just need to do that. I wish it would stop flashing like that. It's fine on our screen.
Right.
Make sure they feel like they see it. Apologize, it seems to be flashing on the presentation screen, but not on the regular. So not sure what that's about, but we'll just continue on here, scrolling. All right, that brings us to the questions we received, 62 of them. I'm going to now ask our first presenter to restate a question and answer it, and then we'll go down the line with each presenter as long as we have time. Please, James.
Sure. So one of the first questions that I was able to see as I was scrolling by was that do we have agency and political support for the water quality treatment component? And I think the answer to that is an overwhelming yes. I think we have the support of the governor, we have the support of the agencies. Our chairman of the South Florida Water Management District Governing Board, Chauncey Goss, is here today. And I can tell you all of the cities in Lee County, as well as Lee County, have made this water quality treatment component a priority. And I think you have the full support, political and agency support for this project. So.
I like this one. What can we do to help? That's very important because what we do in our own backyards is also contributing to the problem. Eric Livingston, who is a long standout at DEP years ago, called it personal pollution. And so what we have to do in our yards is make sure that we dry our fertilizers properly, keep them away from water bodies, clean up after your bed, contribute because they're our local runoff. We're part of the problem and we'll also be part of the solution from here on out.
One of the ones I jotted down was, will this become a smaller Lake O with the same problem? And that is really the purpose for this feasibility study. That has been a concern of the C-43 reservoir from the beginning because it is so large. And so that really is the purpose of this feasibility study and this working group is to develop a project that will address that so that does not become a case.
One of the questions I think is, when will the meetings be announced? Where will they be announced? And will there be evening meetings? The meetings, we're looking at the timeline that was shown in the presentation. We're looking at the contract being finalized in probably the next week, and we'll have our working group kickoff meeting and a work plan developed. So this fall, early this fall, we anticipate the meetings for the public. There'll be in the Caloosahatchee Basin, which could be Lee or Hendry County. And there was a question about evenings. We're going to try and have an evening meeting so we can engage individuals who are working during the day. There will be 4 of those meetings, and then there will also be the final presentation of the study.
All right. I got called out specifically on one of the comments addressed directly to me, so I'll answer that one. We are wrapping up feasibility, the mesocosm study, the C-43 mesocosm study with support from Wetland Solutions. And we looked at both submerged aquatic vegetation and emergent aquatic vegetation and how effective they are at treating nitrogen and removing nitrogen from the system. And in our study, which we're getting ready to finalize, we have found that both those plant communities are pretty much equally as effective at treating nitrogen. So hopefully you all will get exposure and be able to read that study once it's finally released to the public.
Okay, great. We have time for 2 more questions.
Okay. So this is kind of a combination of a few of the questions. One was, why can't we move ahead now? Sorry. The question was, why can't we move ahead now? And why another study? Why not just fix it now? Well, as you all know, this is a very large project. It encompasses 10,500 acres just for the storage component. You can't just move forward with a project if you don't know what that project's going to look like. So you do have to design it. There is some design time. That's what the feasibility study is about, figuring out what's going to be the best treatment technology for treating the water as it comes in to the reservoir, leaving the reservoir. So I know people get bogged down with the bureaucratic, timelines and things like that it takes to do these studies. But we're talking projects that are $500 million. So it's important that we get it right. We want to treat it the highest level we can, but it can't be done overnight. We can't just move forward with a project if we don't know what that project is.
So, kind of far reaching. What's the most critical component to understanding and repairing our water quality? To me, I think source identification. I think we have to understand where the pollution is coming from, because we're dealing with stormwater, and stormwater, as you know, is large volumes of water, and by the time it reaches our estuaries and rivers, whatnot, it's very diffuse, and it's all built in it. We're trying to treat large amounts of stormwater for small amounts of pollutants. It's rather difficult, because you got to hold that water and contain it and treat it before releasing it. You can find the source, you can start focusing in on where the problem areas lie, and put our money, hard-earned tax money into those type of efforts.
Great. Thank you very much. If you could all join me with giving our panelists a round of applause. All right, while we're switching back here, just want to call up our next